Assalamu alaikum. I am Adrienne Lucas, and on behalf of Lahore School of Economics, I warmly welcome you all to the 6th International Conference on Applied Development Economics. We are delighted to have you here, and I extend a special thank you to all the speakers who have traveled from across the country and around the world to share their valuable work with us. I would like to express our gratitude to our esteemed partners, the International Growth Center and the Consortium for Development Policy Research. Your support has been instrumental in making this conference possible.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Qul huwallahu ahad. Allahu samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Sadaqallahu al-azim.
It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Shahid Amjad Chaudhary, Rector of the Lahore School of Economics, to deliver the welcome remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished guests, absolutely delighted to have you all here. I wanted to speak about a couple of issues which I thought would be appropriate for this conference. It's an interesting time to think about these issues. It's always a good time to think about these issues, but it's also particularly appropriate time because Pakistan celebrated its 77 years of existence, 78 years of being Independence Day. And it was a good time to take stock. And I think it's very interesting that this conference is happening a day later because I think many of the issues which we'll be discussing here are very appropriate for the conference. Sort of trying to think through the 77 years yesterday and a couple of sort of things I wanted to stress. You see, the Pakistanis are very fortunate in many ways because they happen to sit on extremely precious lands. This is 800,000 plus square kilometers of probably one of the richest basins in the world. Certainly, perhaps the oldest surviving river basin civilizations. And lots of interesting people have wandered through this region and have settled here. And this is reflected in the very rich tapestry of its peoples. I sometimes when I think about it, it's an odd comparison to make, but the boiling pot story, which is so now interesting and a subject of attention and admiration of the US, is certainly, this area is actually seen it in practice. And a lot of people don't realize it. We have the Baloch, the Sindhi, the Kashmiris, the Pathans, the Punjabis, and everybody else in between thrown in who inhabit this land. And this very rich piece of land has led to a very fertile population, which has its own strengths but its own challenges. This is a country of 240 million people, the 6th largest, most populated country in the world. we had kept dreaming about, birth control and family planning, and this and that. And it's very clear that we really, like every other civilization, have to go through the cycle, which is that as per capita incomes increase, people restrict family sizes as it makes sense for them economically to do so. But this large population then has its own challenges. How do we educate them, make sure they're healthy, provide them jobs, and make all of this work? The second thing, which I think, keeping our fingers crossed, with which we are very fortunate, is that Pakistan, despite its challenges on the political side, keeps reverting back to the democratic form, which to me is an amazing place to be, because we experiment with military regimes, but in the end, it's very clear even to the military regimes that they serve their purpose, peace of home, let the people represent themselves. But then that also has its own challenges. I keep thinking about it. It's very easy to run a despotic government. It's very, very easy. You see it, the big populations, China, I hate saying it even with India, who is the world's largest democracy, veering towards one-party rule, and in some sense fascism, though I hope not. I think they still have a lot of life up there. But still, it's interesting. But the democracy itself then also leads to its own challenges. If you think about the Pakistani economic development experience, we've grown well, and we've grown without economic crisis in all our military regimes. It's only when we've had democratic regimes that after every 2-3 years of democracy, the economy collapses, essentially under the strains of the public interest groups having to manage the situation, and then what they do is they print money, they borrow money, and the whole situation gets out. So again, this blessing has to be managed. In Pakistan, I think if I have to think of 2-3 immediate challenges, one is, as I've said, population. And to me, that's linked to it most importantly with women. And I'm glad that this conference is looking at it. Pakistan's women are grossly, I think the labor participation rate is about 20% or less. Lowest, one of the lowest in the world. And in many ways, it's a question of security and other issues. So this conference is going to be talking about them, and I think we need to. But overall, we need to think about the labor force, the labor markets, and employment. And I really am looking at this talk, this project, to give us some insights so we can start also learning and thinking and working together on these issues. The other two challenges, which I won't get into in detail, but I think we're going to be addressing. One is that Pakistan, as it tries to grow, inevitably goes into foreign exchange crisis. And we've been trying to break out of this syndrome, but we haven't really quite succeeded. And I think think our session more on trade will help us look at these issues. The other two issues which I think we are not looking at it directly, but which are challenging Pakistan today, are the energy sector and wheat prices, food prices. Now, both of these are actually products of the country trying to move towards what we believe is the correct direction, which is towards freer markets. While Pakistan, give example, in these two sectors, we had till 1990 an energy sector, at least the electricity part of it, run by a public sector company. And that was sort of facing huge challenges. So we said, no more public sector investment, we'll do it privately. Sounded great, and we started off. And today, we can't afford the electricity because we hadn't done the homework. The microeconomics of it had been left behind. And the net result is that today, the average price of electricity in Pakistan is 25 cents a unit. No country can run 25 cents a unit. The second greatest challenge, which I said, is food prices. Pakistan happens to be sitting on the richest agricultural land in the world. Our topsoils are 5-6 feet deep. I went to Argentina, the topsoils are 4 inches. So this is hugely productive land. But the big crop which we produced, which was wheat, we produced 27 million, 30 million tons of wheat, was procured by the government. Last year, or this year, the government, in its wisdom and with a little prodding from our international partners who believe in free markets, refused to procure wheat at the last moment. So the prices of wheat collapsed by 50%, which they are. So the farmer has gone broke. But it's been a great boom for the consumers. Wheat prices having halved means that the average Pakistani can now afford bread more easily. And the food wage has become very favorable. So again, this is a microeconomy. How do we regulate our markets or make them function more efficiently so that we can look after farmers' interests? I imagine, I still remember my first agricultural class, that was the first thing they put on, on the board. What happens when the corporate players on the whole lot. So I do think that this conference today, and I compliment one Dr. Naved Hamid and the Center for Economic Policy Research for having these micro-conferences, applied development conferences every year. I wanted to thank, of course, Craig and Dr. Naved Hamid particularly, but I also wanted to thank our sponsors, the Lahore School, of course, the International Growth Center for being a party and financing this, the Consortium for Development Policy Research, which is a partner in this, and of course the International Innovation and Technology Center, headed by Dr. Azam, and of course all of us. So you're all very welcome. As I said, I think the Lahore School itself, and we're trying to work hard at it, but I think all of sure that we do much more work on applied economics. And today we are very fortunate in having some of the world's leading microeconomists to share with us how they look at problems, how they analyze them, and we hope that we'll all learn but also contribute to each other's work. Thank you ever so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Now I am honored to introduce Dr. Adrienne Lucas, who will be presenting her plenary talk titled Increasing Learning in Existing Systems. Dr. Lucas is a professor of economics at University of Delaware. Her research focuses on the economics of education and disease, exploring how information affects school choice, optimizing existing school resources to improve student learning, and understanding the applicability of research findings in various contexts. The plenary talk will be chaired by Dr. Azam, Dean of the Faculty of Lahore School of Economics. Over to you, Dr. Azam and Dr. Lucas.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I'm really honored to be here. Ironically, the first time I presented something that I'm going to present today was in Accra, Ghana, and the power went out in the middle of my talk. So I feel like maybe it's this paper that has caused the power outage, but I'm very happy the power is back. So, oh, that wasn't my slide. Well, what I'm going to talk about today is thinking about increasing learning in existing systems. And when I say existing systems, what I mean is using existing personnel, using existing resources, and I have a lovely slide deck prepared that is not here today here. Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, great. So the motivation for this is largely that there's low productivity in the education sector, which the World Bank has coined the learning crisis. And what this means is that students are in school but not learning. And so this is a study from the World Bank that shows that students who are in grade 2 do not have the proficiencies we would even expect of grade 1 students in many countries. And it gets worse as students progress through schooling. And so you may be sitting there and thinking, wait a minute, I've read a paper by maybe me, by maybe some Nobel laureates, that's who I've cited here, by the way, those are distinct sets, that there's all of these rigorously evaluated policies on how to improve learning. And so the puzzle is, why are students in school but not learning if there's all of this rigorous evidence coming from economists, this is a very small sample of it, on how to improve learning. And so the issue is not what to do, right? We have all these things that have worked, but most of them have worked in smaller scale settings. So they've worked in 100 schools. They've worked when someone, a principal investigator, an academic has been making sure that things are done, or an NGO is making sure that things are done. So the question is not what to do, but how to do it in existing systems. And so what I want to talk to you today about is an evolution of my work in Ghana that's really taken this question quite literally to think about how do we take something evidence-based and try to put it in existing systems. And so how can learning be improved? So the first paper is 4 policies to increase learning at scale, which is a paper that I worked on with Andy Duflo and Jessica Kissel. But what we found in this paper is we found learning gains, but one of the puzzles was implementation by the teachers was very, very low. Teachers didn't actually do what they were told to do, which led to the next paper, which we called Managing to Learn, where we thought about, okay, let's think about the school leaders. How can school leadership be harnessed to increase teacher implementation? And that's with Sabrine Begg and Anne Fitzpatrick, and we have a working paper on that. And I want to spend most of my time actually talking about this paper. Then there was a realization that training teachers is really expensive. So everyone is concerned with cost effectiveness and making sure that government budgets are used appropriately. And so one of the things that happened in the first two papers was teachers were trained initially, then they had refresher trainings. And so the question was, can we make refresher trainings more inexpensive if we do it digitally, or are they even necessary? And so we test that, Sabrina and I, and then we added a co-author, Stephanie Bonds, and I'll have some preliminary findings out of that. And then we think about what teacher training does, is it does a few things. First of all, it actually provides content to teachers. When we think about refresher training, there's this content component, but they should have already seen it. But then there's also this aspect of it's telling them this is an important thing to do. It's also telling them this is an effective thing to do. So can we just do that last bit? Can we make this a lot less expensive by just saying, hey, remember this program, this is an effective thing, go do it. And so we developed a pamphlet, and I'll show you some very, very preliminary findings from that. And so you say, that's great, we're talking about people in school, what about those out of school? And so I have two super, super preliminary. Well, the one is medium preliminary, and number 6 is very, very preliminary. Thinking about people who are out of school. And so the first thinks about school-aged girls, adolescent girls who are out of school. And the second one is with Atik, who is there, who we think about increasing the access to digital marketplace for marginalized women. So I'm probably not going to have much time to talk about these last two. These two take place in Pakistan, so I would love to have conversations kind of on the side with a lot of you to learn more about your thoughts on these, but probably won't have time to get into that. Okay, let's dive into thinking about Ghanaian schooling. And so before I tell you about these papers, I need to give you a very brief background on some of the issues in Ghanaian schooling. These things I'm going to talk about are not uniquely Ghanaian. We see in many middle, low-income countries that primary school access is high. In Ghana, it's increased substantially in the last 20 years. But students are in school but not learning. And one of the specific challenges is heterogeneous classrooms with many first-generation learners. So in our data, only about half of fathers, about a third of mothers are literate or have completed primary school. And so this causes challenges because they're not familiar with the system and they can't support their learners. And the default is teacher-focused instruction. So the best example I can give you of teacher-focused instruction is this. This is a really bad way to teach kids how to read, right? It's also not a great way to teach children in general, where there's someone standing in the front of the room lecturing at a room full of people. So this is a do as I say, not as I do example, right? So if you're going to go teach a classroom of individuals, don't do it like this. The second thing that happens is there's this adherence to the official curriculum, meaning at the end of grade 2, this material must be covered, even if students don't know the material, right? We're going to cover all this material. We're going to cover this material in grade 3, etc. And the final piece that's important for what we're going to talk or what we're going to study is that teachers are essentially hired, paid, and assigned to school. There's very little local control at the school level. So a school leader can't say to a teacher, I'm going to promote you, you're doing a great job, or I'm going to pay you less, you're doing a bad job. Those aren't options for these schools. And so the important point is everything I'm going to talk about is existing systems. So the material development, the trainers, the supervisors, the teachers, these are all existing personnel and existing systems. So the first paper I want to talk about is experimental evidence on 4 policies to increase learning at scale. So the 4 policies, and these 4 policies were selected thinking about what evidence we had in economics literature, thinking about what was of interest to the government, and the 4 things are pull out remedial. And so what I mean by this is students were tested in 3 of these scenarios. Students were tested to learn their learning level. And then students who were determined to be below learning level were removed from the classroom part of the day and taught at their learning level instead of their learning level. And they were taught by an assistant. And so this is part of a larger class of interventions called differentiated instruction, which you may have heard of it referred to as TARL or teaching at the right level. That's all just this class of interventions thinking about focusing on the individual student. The second policy was after school remedial. Same idea, except for it now after school with an assistant for the same type of help with their remedial learning. The third is classroom split, right? So this is going to tell us maybe it's not about the remedial content, maybe it's just working with fewer students. So classroom split takes an assistant and instead of working with remedial learners, works with a random, but not really random, an arbitrary, right? An arbitrary part of the classroom every day. And those are all with assistants, those first three. The final one is partial day tracking. And partial day tracking means, right, students are tested for their learning level, and then they meet with their learning level instead of their grade level for part of the school day. This takes place across 3 different grades, and so students are then reallocated based on their learning level for part of the day. We're going to do an RCT, and it's going to test these 4 versus each other and a 5th arm, which is the control group. We focused on students who started the study in primary 1, and we're going to follow them until primary 3, or whatever grade level they're in when we come back 2 years later. And a lot of data were collected for this. So there's 9 rounds of data collection. There's a full baseline with a student achievement test. There's 2 full follow-ups with 2 more achievement tests. And then there's 6 partial spot checks, meaning there were 6 rounds of visiting these schools. Each school was not visited every round. Each school was visited on average about 2.5 times. But we just kept visiting schools and seeing how things were going. This is known as TCAI. This paper has been around so long, it has its own acronym, which is TCAI, and so it's the Teacher Community Assistant Initiative. So any of you who are grad students or junior faculty and are feeling badly about how long your papers are taking to get published, come talk to me. It's gonna be okay, is the lesson. Papers find good homes, it just sometimes takes them a long time. So 2 years after the intervention, this is the learning gains. And so you see the first 2 are the pull-out remedial and after-school remedial. And these are in test score standard deviation. So those 2 groups learn about 15% of a standard deviation. And the other 2 learn about half as much. And so thinking about this in terms of a learning year, right, the more successful ones, about 36% of a learning year. So in the span of 2 years, this intervention increased learning by about 36% of a learning year. And you should notice that the effect sizes are about twice for the after school and the pull-out than they are from the classroom split and the partial day. And so we started digging into this to understand what happened. Well, what happened was people in the partial day tracking, the teachers didn't actually implement the program. So this is based on the 6 rounds of spot checks, and you can see that in the first 2 instances, about 30 or 40% of the time, when an enumerator showed up at the school, they were dividing students correctly by the learning level. Only in 6% of cases were teachers doing that. And if we think about the effects, okay, so the teachers aren't really implementing. They're not really implementing by about 7 or 8 times, but the effect sizes are half. So it seems like if we can get these teachers to actually do this is potentially really transformative. And so then we said, okay, how does this fit with the rest of the literature? So the blue bars are the 3 differentiated instruction interventions. And then the black stripe bars are the interventions previously done in India. And so if we think about grouping these into similar categories, the studies that are in existing systems that didn't have extra supervision, those effects are small. When you take existing teachers and you give them an NGO supervisors, those effects are getting a little larger. And they're larger still if you use an assistant. So there's many differences between a classroom teacher and an assistant. But we start to see this very promising thing with NGOs. And so this led us to ask, can we get these NGO-sized effects or even bigger effects within the government? This led us to our next paper, which is Managing to Learn. And so as the title might imply, we take the previous motivation, which is low productivity in the education sector. Policy options exist. I just showed you an example of a paper where differentiated instruction was successful. And we're going to add insights from the management literature. So the management literature is primarily in the private sector, and it tells us that if you improve management, you can improve productivity. But most of what people mean when they say improve management is they mean you're going to fire your bad workers, you're going to promote your best workers, and you're going to hire great workers. But those aren't things that public sector managers and certainly school leaders, school principals, they can't do anything about. So what can they do to try to build on the management of these schools? And so they can lead. So if you think about leading versus managing, right? Having a leader or being a leader means someone is following you, right? They're not being forced to because you can't tell them, I'm going to fire you if you don't do what I say. You have to motivate people. You have to show by example. And one of the ways people can show by example is they can use effort, right? So I can use my own costly effort and say, I'm going to do something that's expensive to me in terms of my time to show to you this is an important thing to do. And then teachers, are they going to internalize that and are they going to implement? And so that's what we're going to test. Again, we partnered with the Ghanaian Education Services to test how to improve management and student learning. Again, we're doing RCT. So the first one, we train the teachers in differentiated instruction, so similar training to what we just saw in the previous paper. And then we give managers, and by managers I mean school leaders, so maybe they're called, in Ghana, they're called head teachers, or school principals, headmasters, those people. We're going to give them 2 ways to signal how important this program is to the system, to educating students. And the first is an observation form. So the observation form hit the highlights of the program. Did you divide students by learning level? Are you having active pedagogy, or are you lecturing at students? And to complete this form, head teachers had to sit in a classroom for 30 minutes. So here's the costly effort, right? I'm a head teacher. This is so important. I'm going to leave whatever I was working on, and I'm going to sit in your classroom for 30 minutes, and I'm going to watch what you're doing. We also had the head teachers attend the trainings with the teachers to say, again, I'm going to set aside multiple days, and I'm going to attend this training with you to signal how important this exercise is. Right? The second intervention did all of this, and then in talking to stakeholders, we heard that people were frustrated. They thought that the relationship between head teachers and teachers was adversarial. And so we said, okay, let's teach head teachers kind of how to be better people managers, right? How to have better interactions with their subordinates. And so one of the things we talk about, these are the tools that we're supposed to use with our grad students, like a criticism sandwich, right? This paper is really great. Tables 1 through 10 are totally wrong, but really the conclusion is excellent, right? So kind of packaging things that maybe you're not doing as well with something that you're doing really well. And we're going to test this all relative to a control group. We collected a lot of data. This is a theme in my project. We collect a lot of data. We did a baseline, 2 spot checks, and a follow-up. That was all during the intervention year. And then the intervention ends. And this is an important date, March 2020. I think we all remember where we were and what we were doing. We were doing fieldwork in Ghana. And schools shut down, right? The whole world shuts down. So we have a partial spot check after the intervention to see what schools are doing. Now, the blessing in this is that we then were able to do a follow-up 2 years later. And at this point, students have graduated from their primary school, they're in junior high school, they've had their school closures, and Ghana schools closed for about 18 months. And we'll be able to see what happens with learning. Let me first just say about management. Management improves. We use 2 different measures of management that are taken out of the Development World Management Survey. One is observational practices. And so it improves symmetrically across both of them, right? So head teachers are getting into the classroom, they're observing teachers, teachers are implementing. And then people management was supposed to be, by design, bigger in this blue group, because these are the folks who were, told how to make a criticism. So management improves. The second thing is that we're really interested in classroom implementation, and as a side, we're interested in classroom norms or school norms, right? Remember the issue the previous time was that teachers weren't implementing. This is like the most exciting table I think I've ever made. I guess you do meet your tables, but I've ever made. And it's column 3, right? So if you look at column 3, 60% of the time of these spot checks, teachers are not implementing. They were implementing only 6% of the time, and now they're implementing 60% of the time. We also increase the likelihood that teacher is in the classroom, right? So the teacher just wanted to be in the classroom. We have an active learning index. We increase that by about a little less than half the standard deviation. And then we just ask teachers some kind of questions about how well are you implementing, what are you doing, and about 80%. They're doing about 80% of what they're supposed to be doing. Right, so this is super exciting that they actually implement this. And the difference is the head teachers are signaling the importance of this intervention. And so the other thing I didn't bring to the table, but they also became less accepting of shirking. We actually changed the school norms. So we gave teachers and head teachers little vignettes. So we said, Mary is a teacher, and all the students like Mary, but Mary is absent at least one day every 2 weeks. How effective of a teacher is Mary? Okay. And we did this with different vignettes for teachers and head teachers, and we find in the treatment group, actually the teachers and the head teachers become much less accepting of shirking, which is primarily absenteeism. So they're now like, no, it's not okay. Even if the kids like her, it's not okay that she's absent. And then I told you we had a modified spot check, and so about a year after, midway through the academic year after we implemented, teachers are still implementing, right? So they were told, keep doing this, but they weren't given any additional materials or training, and they're still implementing about at a 40% level. So still higher than the initial intervention. It falls a little bit, but that's still pretty remarkable that they're still doing it even without these additional trainings. Other thing it did was it reduced teacher turnover. This is a classic example out of the management literature of how to measure management. And so there's a lot less teacher turnover in treatment schools, right? Teachers seem to be happier in their posts. This is a really big problem. This is a piece of the paper that's gotten a lot of attention in other countries that are having severe teacher shortages. So the extent to which you can reduce teacher turnover by making the job more enjoyable is really an important outcome. But honestly, the government is interested in number 4. The Ghanaian government is the most interested in number 4. You know, all this is fine and good, but if test scores don't increase, they're not very interested. And test scores actually do increase. So this is a study, this graph shows the entire evolution. So if we start at the beginning of our period, we norm all the test scores to be 0. This is our intervention year. So at the end of the intervention year, student test scores are 11% of a standard deviation higher, which is 30% of a year of learning. So we get larger gains in learning in less time than the previous study. And then there's this post-intervention year where they're continuing in school, and then in March 2020, schools close. Then students have graduated, or we started with students who are in P5 and P6, which is the final 2 years of primary school. We pick them up again in the first 2 years of junior high school, and these distances have persisted. They're a little bit smaller. They're about 0.07 standard deviations, but it's still 30% of a year of learning. And one of the things we were concerned about is, will schools close because of COVID? Is it just that the control group, learned nothing, or they kind of regressed? And it's not the case. Maybe the learning curve is not as steep, but certainly the control group learned, but the treatment group continued to learn more even after the end of the intervention. So that was the most exciting table. This is the most exciting chart that we made. And then the management, implementation, and learning, all of this improved. And so we're going to think about this in terms of a conceptual framework. So teachers, if they do it, there's a higher return to DI than to the curriculum. And teachers want to do high return things, but effort is costly, and they probably don't really believe the head teacher if the head teacher says, hey, this is a great new program, you all should go do this. Why would the teacher believe this head teacher? There's no reason for them to believe it. So the head teacher, though, can act as a leader. Their proclamations are not credible, but they're sitting in a classroom for 30 minutes saying this is important, and their actions backing up that importance can show the teachers, no, this is important, this is going to improve learning. And then the question becomes, how come our extra management training didn't do anything else? Well, it makes teachers like their schools more, but it doesn't improve student learning, and it doesn't improve student learning because it doesn't get into the classroom, right? Nothing changed differentially for that people management arm. They implemented at the same rate as the other treatment. And so to change student learning, you gotta change what happens in the classroom. And so this criticism sandwich maybe made teachers a little happier with their jobs, but didn't actually help them change what they were doing in the classroom. And so by including these head teachers, this high effort equilibrium can be achieved. And we think there's an implication to this beyond school, right? Schools are not the only public sector where, you know, the manager cannot hire and fire. We can think about many other public systems and public sectors where you need to really engage the manager, that just thinking about the frontline civil servant isn't going to be enough. You have to start thinking above them. And so let's go back to thinking about where this stacks up relative to other programs. Now all these blue things, or this includes the previous study and all these evidence, we're getting, this green is the study, we're getting effect sizes that are pretty close to assistant-led effect sizes. The assistants, there's a lot different between assistants and a teacher, but all we really did was use the existing teachers and think about leveraging their managers, other school leaders, to help them increase student learning. And then you might say, okay, this is about management. Well, so these two papers improve management, but they don't improve student learning. And so another contribution of this paper is to think about, it's not just management, right? It's not just this big amorphous thing called management. It really matters what the exact management is doing, and can that management affect what's happening in the classroom? So the Ghanaian education sector was honestly really excited by this paper, and it became part of this big USAID, World Bank funded project called GALA, where they're going to bring differentiated learning to 10,000 schools in the country. So our study was 210 schools. Now they're thinking about taking it to 10,000 schools. And 10,000 schools, it gets really expensive to train. So on average, 60,000 teachers, right? So 6 teachers per school. So on average, you're training 60,000 people. Do you really need to train them multiple times, right? Is that initial training enough? That was one of the questions the government was interested in asking. And then secondly, thinking about, can we use digital materials? So there's a trade-off with the digital. You have a model where you're giving people the exact thing, they can access it at their convenience, but they can also not access it at their convenience. And so what we end up doing is a paper that we're going to call The Importance of Refresher Training. We have some preliminary results from this, where we're now in a world where all the teachers and their school managers have gotten that initial first training. We're going to do an RCT where we vary the mode that they get refresher training, or if they get refresher training at all. And so in the first one, they're going to get this standard in-person, everyone comes together, and not all 60,000, right? Geographically, people come together and they receive the training. The second treatment is going to provide the same training, but do it in a digital format. And within here, we also do a cross-randomization of a phone call to say, remember, you need to do this, and they're going to get access to the digital refresher training course. And then the control is business as usual. These are the test score effects. So the first thing to notice is we don't have differential attrition, so that's a good thing. The test score increases, but it only increases for the in-person refresher training. This is a combined score in math and English. It does not increase for the digital refresher training. And the question is, well, first let's scale this to a year of learning. So this refresher training was important, right? If you think about increasing student learning, this additional refresher training increased student learning by an additional 17% of a year of learning. So high quality refresher training seems important, but the digital, there's no effect of the digital training. And that's not because the digital training was bad, it's because no one actually did the digital training. I don't know about all of you, but I have emails in my inbox that are like, hey, make sure you complete this digital thing that the university really wants you to do. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do that after I read the other 100 emails, in my inbox. And so the teachers didn't engage with us. And we did a randomization where we randomly called some teachers and we randomly called some head teachers and said, you need to do this. We're not sure yet if that did anything, but on average, the take-up was really, really low, like under 20% low. But the teachers who actually engage in it, over 3/4 of them actually finish it. So the key really is to see is that getting teachers to start the process it appears to be the key to getting people to complete the process. And so the questions that we're still analyzing in the data is, does this translate into changes in the classroom? What were the effects of this nudge to increase, or this phone call to increase the digital take-up? And then we need to do some cost effectiveness around how cost effective is this refresher training. So is it the content of the refresher training, or is it actually just the act of the training? Is there some signal that happens in the training? And so if we think about what refresher training does, it actually provides training. These teachers were already trained, so it's really kind of reminding them of their previous training. It also signals to teachers that the organization is serious about this program. One of the things we learned in this context is that schools are asked to do a bunch of things by a bunch of different actors, right? So this was a ministry Ghana Education Services program. USAID is actually in there doing something else in a lot of these schools. There's also NGOs, local NGOs, international NGOs who are giving them textbooks and saying, use these books instead. Or there's play-based learning, there's all these different things going on. And we learned that teachers are having a hard time navigating all of these different things that they're being asked to do. And so the refresher training, though, says, no, this is a really serious thing. This is the Ghana Education Services policy. You need to be sure you implement this. And the final thing that happens in these trainings is teachers learn, or they're reminded about the value of this program to increase student learning. So what we thought about is, okay, what is the cheapest part of this? And can we peel out the cheapest part? And what if that does something? That would be amazing. And so we just said, why don't we just do the last one? And you can just save everyone a lot of money and save everyone a lot of time. And so the power of paper is the product that this became. This is super, even more preliminary, but we do have some little results. So we're back in the world where this is a different group of schools yet again. These teachers have received the training, managers have the observation form, and they've also received the training. These were not the schools with the in-person versus the digital refresher training. Those are different schools. And so we do an RCT, and the cheapest way we thought that we could convey the importance of this program was to make a pamphlet. So we made a pamphlet. And the pamphlet is basically about how awesome differentiated learning is in Ghana. Right? So I just showed you some evidence that if you do it, it improves learning. We basically thought to distill all of that into a pamphlet that would be understandable by teachers. And then there was a meeting with an enumerator who reiterated and said, this is awesome. And you say, awesome is a very colloquial term, but that was really what we were going for. Just kind of like this excitement, this is awesome, you want to do it. And then the control was business as usual. This is the pamphlet. I love this pamphlet. So this was the cover page. It's a trifold thing. And the cover page just says, I can read it small, but basically it's like success in differentiated learning. We provided some infographics on how differentiated learning is proven effective in Ghana. And so this is, kids learn to read, or kids do better addition, kids read more, they can do math. The really exciting thing, I think, is this panel here on the right. These are actual quotes from actual teachers about how excited they were by differentiated learning. And so, for me, the program has been the best program ever that I've had to implement. These are actual teachers who implement this. And the one that really gave me chills, and I thought, wow, we're actually, improving learning and changing So we didn't make up these quotes. These are actual quotes by actual teachers who implemented this program, and we emphasized that when we gave this to the teachers. And so the very preliminary effects of this are, after seeing the pamphlet, teachers increased by 30% of a standard deviation the belief that DL is more effective. Right? One of the things we said was potentially a challenge of why teachers weren't implementing is they didn't understand this was more effective. So this increases this is more effective. It increases their belief in how many students can do basic math. And then the question is, that's all fine and good, but none of this is going to change student learning unless teachers actually change their behavior. And do they change their behavior? We don't know yet. So that's a different data collection that just left the field, so we're going to be hopefully answering that question soon. So if I can draw 4 big lessons, how much time do I have left?
You have about 15, 20 minutes.
Oh, wow, okay. All right. So the big lessons we have left is that learning can be improved in existing systems with existing personnel.
Oh, I'm sorry, they said about 7 minutes.
Excellent. Okay, I only have about 7 minutes worth of stuff to say, so that's awesome. Great. The second piece is that, right, this manager's costly effort signal increased implementation by 10 times, and the learning gains persist after some really trying situations, right, where they're transitioning to a new school, schools were closed for 18 months. We also found that refresher training increased student learning, and we still have some open questions about how effective digital might be, but the barrier right now for digital is people are not engaging with it. And finally, a pamphlet can change beliefs. So those were great results for people who are in school. I want to spend, I think I have 5 minutes talking about improving outcomes for out-of-school girls and women, and this is part of my agenda of research in Pakistan. So what about those out of school? So the working paper I've been working on is Learning Beyond School, another chance for out-of-school adolescent girls with Sabrine Begg and Fitzpatrick. The idea is an out-of-school intensive learning camp. So these are girls who have dropped out of school or maybe never started school, and it's an intensive learning camp trying to get these girls a basic literacy and numeracy if they've never attended school, or increasing their literacy and numeracy if they have attended school. We do an RCT at the village level, and what we find is there's increased math and language scores, there's increased parental educational aspirations for their girls, so we ask the parents, how much schooling do you want your girls to have, and that seems to increase. But it decreases the girls' own educational aspirations. So we think this is really interesting in thinking about getting more school actually, or getting more learning actually cause these girls to have lower schooling aspirations. And I'd love to talk more about this in side conversations. And the final paper, and this is with Atik, is increasing access to digital marketplaces for marginalized women. So these are older women, they're out of school age, and the question we're going to ask in this RCT is, can access to a digital marketplace improve outcomes for women? We can think about that it will allow women, and this is a point that was brought up in the opening remarks, there's really low female rate of participation here. And one of the things a digital marketplace might do is allow women to balance the many different demands they have on their time. It might also allow women to sell their products without having to interact with people in a marketplace, which maybe their families or they may not feel comfortable doing. And so there's a lot of potential here, but the question is, will they actually set up the digital shops? And so this is some work that we're doing right now in field work, and would again love to have more conversations about this. So I just want to thank everyone so much for your time, and because I know you want to cite those 2 papers, these are the full citations of the 2 papers, and the rest are coming soon, and that I promise is mostly to my co-authors because these papers have been around for a while, but the rest are hopefully coming really soon. And again, thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you so much.
Some questions. You're welcome to sit and
Oh, great.
for that. Sure. So I thought I'd open it up for questions and comments. We have about 15 minutes. Anyone? Oh, yes, sir.
Now it's fine.
It's fine? Okay. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear the overview. I was wondering about the digital versus the in-person refresher training. Why did you not do a session online? So if I understood correctly, one of the challenges there was that you did the digital training and they never really engaged with it. I was thinking about if the ministry is involved and they say, oh, come for this session and 20 other teachers are also there, they may have paid more attention. Is that something, was there a reason that you didn't go down that path? And second, I was wondering if there was any element of a network formation or discussion in the in-person one, given that there are cross schools that might be contributing, and if you're able to unpack that in any way. Thanks.
Thank you, those are great questions. So, given the availability of connectivity, it was an issue of, I think you're talking about like a simultaneous big webinar. So that isn't possible given the kind of network connectivity of these schools. The idea was the teachers could access this. They would probably have enough network to download it and look at, it was both some videos and then some like PowerPoints, so they could look at it on their own, but that they wouldn't all be able to log in real time to a webinar. But I think that's certainly a way in which digital could potentially be integrated. And now I've forgotten your second excellent question. Sorry, which I liked.
Network effect discussions.
Oh, right. So we didn't look at that yet. We don't have, so one of the things in the Managing to Learn study, and people told us to be really important, is a WhatsApp group and a help desk. So people could use WhatsApp to kind of text questions or contact a help desk. And to give you a little bit of the behind the scenes, that was a huge fight with the government over who would actually be the person to answer this help desk. Is it this government organization or that government organization? So we ended up hiring a guy named Kevin, and we added Kevin to the system, and no one called Kevin. So, we didn't really ask questions about networks. That's another interesting thing to think about. Thank you.
Thanks, Luca, and then Teresa.
Thank you. Wonderful research, I think, with so many papers. I want this question just explanatory one and one a little bit normative side. I just wanted to know who are these school headmasters or school heads. Are these the promoted teachers or these are special catered kind of head schools? And why are they putting in extra effort? I mean, if teachers were not putting in extra effort after intervention, why would headmasters be doing it? Were they paid for it or there was any program for it? One normative question, if you allow me, I was struggling with this, that what is the learning level and what is the average learning level per class? And I'm taking only 2 subjects. I'm taking math and I'm taking English. And I wonder what was happening to other courses. So if I focus on 2, maybe students could learn more about them. But what was happening with other courses? And other normative aspect of it is, these learning levels are these averages of USA, averages of the world, or what they are. And if it is average, then shouldn't it always be like this, like a distribution? Some of them would be below it, others would be more than that. That's right.
Great, these are excellent questions. So who are the head teachers? The head teachers are mostly promoted classroom teachers. They are mostly promoted based on years of experience as a teacher, not necessarily because of their teaching effectiveness or because of their managerial effectiveness. So that's who the head teachers are. Why the head teachers exert effort? So I left out a piece of this, which is because their bosses were telling them to. So what was also simultaneously happening was national level monitors were coming to each of these districts and then also coming to the schools. And the schools, 90% of the schools were visited at least once during the study by these national level monitors. And so we think that put the pressure on, or pressure is the wrong term, that was the kind of effort signal by the national monitors. And so then the question is, well, why did the national monitors do it? Well, because someone read the first study and actually believed it. I think that's, they decided this was a government priority. And that's a great question about learning levels. So there's 3 learning And so they were divided by like letter recognition, word recognition, I think was level 2, and level 3 was basic sentence reading. That was the English cuts. And you're right in the focus on only math and language, and that's certainly what these 2 papers focused only on math and language, but they took out from math and language time. So these schools have timetables where for an hour and a half each day, they're supposed to be focusing on math and they're supposed to be focusing on language. And so this just took time in the teacher-led model. It just took time out of those times. And I think part of the question is you're concerned both about other subjects, and honestly we don't know, because you're primary school students, so they're not doing like lab science. But we're concerned about grade level material, that maybe we were really, helping the bottom or really helping students with remedial content, but then they were falling behind in their grade level content. And so by design, our tests include everything from letter recognition through reading comprehension. And so the effects I showed you on the overall test, but we can break the test out and we find actually learning gains in grade level, in remedial material. So we don't think that it offset the kind of grade level content.
I just wanted to ask about whether, other kinds of ways of, communicating the salience of, the different learning interventions, or of, teachers sharing their experiences with these interventions through, things like WhatsApp, chat groups and things like that, because that would be, something that would, wouldn't be as demanding on, having, fast Wi-Fi speeds and whatnot, but people can, build groups, keep in touch, they can share information and other things in sort of a quick and easy way. I don't know if that hasn't been explored at all in this context.
Yeah, that's a great point. So one of the things we think was happening is that teachers were creating their own WhatsApp groups separate from us. Or the government created a WhatsApp group and then no one wanted to use it because no one wanted to ask a question and look dumb, not knowing, what government official was looking at it. So we did hear from teachers they created their own WhatsApp group. We didn't measure that, I don't think, and certainly I don't think the importance to that. But I really like the thought of kind of the mentor or the model teacher where it's not your head teacher, it's an approximate peer. And that's something we've talked about and just hasn't been part of the implementation plan, but I think that's something great to think about. And that's along the point of the networks as well.
Thanks so much. Any other questions? I see this question.
This is really exciting work. And I like that it's both very detailed in the mechanics of learning and education, and yet it's also very general. And so it's a speculative question. I mean, one can imagine there are similar issues in the health sector and lots of public sectors. And to the extent you've thought about it, how would your general learnings apply or not apply as you think about lessons you might share with a health ministry or another ministry?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we would like to think these are broadly applicable to a health ministry. And I don't know enough about the health sector to know what is the analog of the observation form, right? Would it be appropriate to have a doctor shadowed by an administrator, in a clinical setting? But I think it's just something that it costs the manager time. Because one of the things we kept hearing is that these head teachers just sit in their offices shuffling paper. And as a department head, I hear that, right? I feel like I spend a lot of my time, shuffling paper. And so what this did was it got them out of their shuffling papers into the actual spaces where student learning was occurring. And so I think the lesson for the larger public sector is to get managers into the spaces where the healthcare is happening or the police work is happening to send these costly signals. But yeah, thank you for your point. We hope it's broadly applicable.
I'm sorry, there was someone at the end with their hand up? Yes, way at the back. Maybe we can get that person on microphone, or please come up to the table and we can figure it
And there is a saying which goes as when in doubt as history. The part of the African continent which is at the present moment in time organized under the umbrella of Ghanaian Republic has a long history and in more recently a history of interaction with European colonialism. So I wanted to ask, don't you think we should try to build alternative approaches and construct alternative knowledge in their own language so they could free themselves from the colonized past that they have?
Yeah, so local language is a complicated issue. In fact, we engage with that in the TKI study, but in Ghana, so there's I think approximately 30 official local languages, and there is an organization and program called NALAP, the something local language, and that program was changing how instruction happened during the first study. So what happened in Ghana, kind of while the first study was going on, was it used to be just kind of teach in whatever language you feel like teaching. And so this NALAP program said, no, for the first 3 years of education, you teach in the officially assigned local language. Now, that may not actually be the local language of the kids, right? Because if the school is in local language area 1, that doesn't mean this particular village is actually speaking local language number 1. That's the first thing we found. Nevertheless, there was an effort to test the kids in their local language, but the local language program rollout was wrong. And it lingers into our study years. And so there are effects, or we study in the paper the effects on local language. The other thing with the local language rollout was it assumed that students in grade 3 had grade 3 knowledge of local language, which they do orally. But what they hadn't gotten in school in the first 2 years was written local language. So there's lots of issues with the local language. I take your point that the language of the test and the language of instruction is extremely important. And then in Ghana, in grade 4, it switches, in first grade, in the first 2 grades, it's local language primary, and then we learn English as a foreign language. Starting in grade 4, it switches. And in grade 4, the primary language of instruction is English with local language as an extra subject. And so the study, the Managing to Learn, starts in grade 4, and so we're following the government policy, which is language from grade 4 through grade 6. An interesting thing happened, so I have experience on another project that I can talk about in Kenya, where the local language of that was Kiswahili. But there were posters in the schools that said, "We speak English only." And there was immense pressure from the parents to be teaching in English because they saw that as the way that their children could more easily get a high-paying job, was if they were proficient in English. So there's a lot of issues, I agree, with colonialism and tensions between local language and English. And these papers were just following the national policies about local language versus English.
We have time for one more question.
Question and maybe a comment. Great paper, thank you. I wanted to ask, did you experiment with classroom layouts and experimentation with that or class styles? I wanted to just mention that at the Lahore School, about I think 7 years ago, we started with one U-shaped classroom, which we introduced to the MBA class. And now every classroom, all new classrooms are all U-shaped, so we now have the bulk of them. And similarly, previously what we did was also that always half of our classes were discussions or case studies, and this has been. So did you experiment with either classroom size or configuration or classroom, dynamics?
Yeah, these are great questions. So Students are seated in rows. Most of the setups are a table with an attached bench where you have lots of kids kind of crammed on the same bench. So explicitly moving the furniture was not part of the intervention, because that can be really hard in a space-constrained classroom. They kind of don't fit in any other way. But certainly the interactive part was really very important. I have another study in India where actually physically moving the tables, this is for older children, this is in junior high school, was a really important part. And thinking about, taking the tables and seating them so kids face each other, and so they could collaborate and work on the problems together. From what we heard from primary school teachers, you can leave, say, a grade 7, 8, 9 student, a group of them to do their work, and most of them will do their work. If you take a grade 4 or 5 student and you kind of put them in a group and say, do this work, total chaos. And so there's less group learning per se in these interventions, but I completely agree that how a classroom is set up and thinking about, working together is really important as you think about, especially higher education.
I think, okay, we're out of time, but we.
I got a quick quarter past 11, so there are 2-3 minutes left.
Okay.
Anyway, I know this is not the focus of your work, really, and what other work have been done on this remedial teaching, and your results also show a huge impact of that and all this work. If you don't know the basics, then you can't do work after that. My question is practical one. Who were these assistant teachers? Were they trained, qualified, or did you get any person with a metric or what equivalent of that? Because it could have serious cost implications as well as creating jobs in Pakistan.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you think about the evolution of the differentiated learning or teaching at the right level program, it comes from a model of volunteers in the community. That's not practical in the Ghanaian context. So these were from the National Youth Employment Program. So when I said they're with the existing system, they're part of the government system, but they were not part of the schools necessarily. So there used to be a National Youth Employment Program for underemployed youth. They were paid a nominal amount, and they were supposed to be at least a high school graduate from a local community and fluent in the local language. And they were selected by the school management committees. And it's interesting, so the government, when they saw the results of the first paper, they said, exactly what you said, these assistants are expensive. And can we use just teachers? Now, the Botswanan government did something different, which is your implication of this could be a way to employ people. They said, we have all these underemployed people, we would like to employ them in the schools. And so the model of differentiated instruction in Botswana has been the assistant model, because they wanted to add existing personnel. But in both cases, and in the early case, they have less training than a full classroom teacher, and they're paid less.
I'm glad actually nobody asked that question because I was thinking about that. But thank you, Adrienne, that was fascinating, very relevant